I want to start by telling you that I did not go looking for this fight. I'm a 52-year-old man who owns 43 acres of land in Harlan County, Kentucky, who raises horses, who grows hay, and who built his barn with his own two hands over the course of 3 summers, because that is the kind of work that makes a man feel like he is exactly where he belongs on this earth. I did not move to the country to have problems with neighbors. I moved to the country specifically to not have problems with neighbors. I have 43 acres. My nearest property line is 400 feet from my front porch. The whole point of 43 acres is that the world stays at a manageable distance. But Vivienne Alcott found me anyway. My name is James Whitfield, and the story I am about to tell you is the most purely satisfying thing that has ever happened to me in 52 years of living, and that includes the birth of my 2 children, my wedding day, and the first time I rode a horse I had trained from a foal. Those were better in absolute terms. But this story has a specific flavor of satisfaction that those events did not, which is the flavor of watching someone who has absolutely miscalculated their situation realize the full dimensions of their miscalculation in real time, in front of witnesses, with nothing they can do about it. Let me back up. Harlan County is not a suburb. It is not a planned community with an HOA and an architectural committee and a landscaping standards document. It is rural Kentucky, which means land, space, trees, and the general understanding that what a man does on his own property is his business as long as he is not hurting anyone else. I had lived there for 11 years before any of this happened, and in 11 years I had had exactly one interaction with any kind of community governance structure, which was a brief and friendly exchange with the county zoning office when I built my hay storage addition and wanted to confirm the setback requirements. The HOA situation was Vivienne's doing. I will explain. In the late 90s, a developer had platted a small subdivision on the eastern edge of what was now my property. I say what was now my property because I bought out 4 of those original lots over the years as the subdivision failed to attract enough buyers to become a real community. At its peak, the subdivision had 6 homes. By the time Vivienne arrived, 7 years ago, there were 4, and 3 of those were occupied by families I had known for years and gotten along with without incident. The subdivision had been filed with a set of covenants back in the 90s, the way subdivisions were. Standard stuff for the time, no commercial operations, maintain your property, get approval for structures. The covenants had been mostly dormant for years, because with 6 and then 4 families in a rural area, nobody had much interest in enforcing them. And the kinds of things people did on their properties out here, keep horses, run equipment, build outbuildings, were not the kinds of things anyone was interested in complaining about. Vivienne Alcott arrived from Atlanta 7 years ago. She was 58, recently divorced from a man who had apparently left her significantly well off, and she had bought the nicest house in the subdivision, a large custom home on 5 acres that the original developer had built as his own showcase property, because she had decided that what she wanted in the 3rd act of her life was the aesthetic of country living without any of its actual character. She wanted the views and the quiet and the feeling of open land. She did not want the horses, the equipment, the working operations that made that land what it was. She found the covenants about 3 months after moving in. I know the timeline because she mentioned it to me the first time she came to my property, which was about 4 months after she arrived. She drove up my gravel drive in a new silver Bentley Continental, not the car in the title that comes later. This was an earlier model, wearing a linen blazer and carrying a folder, looking like she had taken a wrong turn somewhere between a charity luncheon and a board meeting, and ended up on a gravel road in Harlan County, Kentucky. She introduced herself with the confidence of a woman accustomed to being the most significant person in any room she entered. She told me she had been reviewing the subdivision covenants and had some questions about compliance. She gestured at my barn, which was visible from my driveway, a solid structure I had built myself with rough-sawn lumber from my own trees, a metal roof, proper footings, good drainage. She said she was not sure the barn was in compliance, with the covenant requirements for prior approval of permanent structures. I looked at her, I looked at the folder, I looked at the Bentley on my gravel drive. "Ma'am," I said, "the barn was here when you bought your house." "I understand that," she said, "but the covenants require that structures be approved by the community, and I don't see any record of approval." "The covenants were filed in 1997, I said. "I built that barn in 2008. The covenant enforcement process at that time had been dormant for years. There was no active committee, and no one objected. It's been standing for 15 years. She smiled. It was the kind of smile that people use to signal that they are being very patient with you. "Well, I think we should get organized," she said. "I'd like to form a proper committee to review these things going forward, just to make sure we're all maintaining the community standards." I recognized what was happening. I had been around long enough to recognize it. She did not want to enforce the covenants because she cared about the covenants. She wanted to use the covenants as a tool to reshape the neighborhood to fit her preferences, which were the preferences of a woman from Atlanta who wanted a scenic property in Kentucky without the parts of rural Kentucky that she found inconvenient or aesthetically displeasing. The horses were probably on that list. The equipment noise was definitely on that list. The barn, visible from certain angles on her property, was on that list. "You're welcome to try," I said pleasantly. "I'd consult an attorney first if I were you. Kentucky has specific rules about covenant enforcement, including dormancy provisions." She thanked me for my time, got back in the Bentley, and drove back down my gravel lane. I watched her go and then went back to the horse I had been working with, because the horse needed my attention and Vivienne Alcott had already gotten more of it than she deserved that day. Over the next 18 months, Vivienne worked steadily at building a formal enforcement structure. She contacted the other 3 homeowners in the subdivision. 2 of them, a retired couple named the Becks, who mostly wanted to be left alone, and a young family named the Garcias who had small children and more immediate things to worry about, were politely uninvested. The third, a man named Howard Pell, who had some long-standing grievance with me about a drainage issue that I had thought was resolved, but apparently had not been, was receptive. With Howard and herself, she had 2 of the 4 homeowners in the subdivision aligned with her project. She formed a committee, herself and Howard. She drafted an enforcement process. She sent letters to all 4 homeowners formally notifying them that the Covenant Compliance Committee of the subdivision was now active and would be reviewing all properties for compliance. I got my letter on a Thursday and read it with the weary recognition of someone who has seen this approach before in other contexts. Then I called my attorney. My attorney was not Maureen, different state, different attorney, but a man named Bobby Tartum who practiced real estate law in Harlan County and who had the specific expertise of someone who had spent 30 years dealing with old rural covenants, failed subdivisions, and the various disputes that arise when city people with lawyers and folders arrive in the country and try to impose urban governance structures on land that was doing just fine without them. Bobby's assessment was characteristically direct. The covenants were real and technically enforceable for structures built after the filing date. My barn had been built in 2008, which was after 1997. However, Kentucky had a laches doctrine in property law, the principle that unreasonable delay in asserting a legal right can forfeit that right, and 15 years of dormant enforcement with no objections during construction was a meaningful argument. Additionally, the formation of a committee by 2 of 4 homeowners, with the other 2 not participating, was of questionable legitimacy under the covenant language, which required majority participation for committee formation. 2 out of 4 was exactly 50%, not a majority. Bobby said to let her send her notices and to respond to each one in writing with a brief, factual reply to document everything and to not do anything precipitous. "Let her spend her energy," he said. "She'll either find the limits of what the covenants can actually do or she'll do something that helps your position. People like this usually do one or the other eventually." Vivienne sent me 4 violation notices over the next 14 months. The barn was the subject of the first 2. I responded with Bobby's laches argument both times and received no substantive reply. The third notice was about my equipment storage area, where I kept my tractor, my bush hog, and various implements in a gravel-floored, covered area beside the barn. The fourth was about my round pen, where I worked the horses, a 60-foot diameter circular fence structure that is completely standard on any horse property and that Vivienne apparently found visually objectionable. Each time I responded, Bobby reviewed each response. None of the notices went anywhere because Vivienne did not have the legal footing to enforce them, and she knew it, and Bobby knew it, and eventually I think she knew we knew it. But she was not giving up. She was recalibrating. The recalibration took the form of a legal strategy that she apparently developed with an attorney she had hired in Lexington. The strategy involved filing a formal legal action to have the Covenant Compliance Committee recognized as a legitimate HOA entity under Kentucky law, which would give it enforcement powers that the informal committee structure lacked. This was not a trivial legal undertaking. It cost real money. It took real time. And it demonstrated that Vivienne Alcott was not a woman who accepted limits without trying every door in the building. Bobby kept me informed as this process developed. He monitored the filing. He told me it had some merit but significant obstacles, including the participation question, the dormancy question, and the broader question of whether a four-property subdivision's covenants could be revived and restructured 30 years after filing when the original development had substantially failed. He said the legal action might take 18 months to resolve. He said the outcome was genuinely uncertain, which was not what I wanted to hear, but which was honest. I went about my business. I ran my horses. I maintained my land. I stored my equipment. I worked in my barn. I did not change anything on my property because I was not willing to preemptively surrender things I had built and used for years on the basis of a legal theory that had not been validated. And then, on a February morning 14 months into this whole situation, I woke up and went out to the barn to start my morning feeding and found a silver Bentley parked directly across the barn door. Not near it, not beside it, directly in front of it, blocking the double doors completely, nose to the door, about 18 inches of clearance between the front bumper and the barn wood. The doors opened outward. With the Bentley where it was, they could not open at all. I stood in the cold February morning and looked at the car. My horses were inside. It was feeding time. The hay was stored at the far end of the barn, and the feed bins were just inside the door. I needed to get into that barn. I walked around the car. The engine was cold. It had been there a while, no keys visible, obviously. I looked up my driveway, nothing. I looked toward the road. The gravel lane that led to my property from the county road was empty. I called the county sheriff's non-emergency line. I explained the situation. The deputy who came out 45 minutes later was a man named Dale who had been a deputy in Harlan County for 16 years and who had the calm and patient manner of someone who had seen most things and was not easily surprised by any of them. He walked around the Bentley, wrote down the plate number, ran it, and came back to tell me it was registered to Vivienne Alcott, which I had already known from the license plate frame that said Alcott family in small letters on the bottom. Dale called Vivienne. She did not answer. He left a message informing her that her vehicle was blocking access to a private structure on private property and needed to be moved immediately. He told me he would follow up, but that absent her moving it herself, the process for a tow from private property in the county involved a specific form and a licensed tow company and would take some hours. My horses needed feeding now, not in some hours. I went to the tack room entrance on the side of the barn, which was a smaller door that Vivienne apparently had not thought about or had not known about, and I got in that way and fed the horses through the internal access. It was inconvenient and time-consuming, but the horses got fed. Then I came back outside and stood looking at the Bentley again. I called Bobby Tartum. He answered on the second ring because Bobby was always at his desk by 7:30. I described the situation. He said, very carefully, "James, I want to make sure I understand. She has parked her personal vehicle without your permission on your private property blocking access to your barn." Correct, I said. On 43 acres of private land. Correct. Bobby was quiet for a moment. I could hear him thinking through the legal geography of the situation. She has committed criminal trespass, he said. Her vehicle is on your property without permission and is actively interfering with your use of your property. The deputy has documented this. He has, I said. I'm going to make some calls, Bobby said. In the meantime, document everything. Photo, video, timestamps, and James, do not touch the vehicle. I wasn't planning to touch the vehicle, I said. I know you weren't, he said. I'm saying it anyway because it is important that you do not touch the vehicle. I documented everything. I took 37 photographs and 4 minutes of video footage from multiple angles. I photographed the license plate, the position of the car relative to the barn doors, the measurements of clearance, the cold engine showing long-term parking, and the general scene. I had my timestamp running on the camera the whole time. Then I went and got my bulldozer. Now, before you react to that, and I know how it sounds, let me explain the sequence of events carefully, because the sequence is everything. The bulldozer was a Caterpillar D6 that I used for land maintenance work on my property, clearing brush, moving earth, maintaining drainage channels, the various tasks that 43 acres requires over the course of a year. It lived in the equipment area beside the barn. It was fueled and in working order because I had used it 2 weeks earlier for some drainage work on the back 40. I started it up that morning not because I had decided to do anything specific with it, but because I had work to do on my property that day regardless of the Bentley situation, and I was not going to let Vivienne Alcott's car disrupt my entire operation. I drove the bulldozer out of the equipment area and I parked it about 40 feet from the barn, facing the Bentley with the blade down and the engine running. Then I got off and went inside to make coffee and wait. I want you to understand what 43 acres looks like from a bulldozer seat in February in Kentucky, and I want you to understand what a Caterpillar D6 sounds like when it is idling 40 feet from your car on a cold morning. The D6 is not a subtle machine. It is a several-ton piece of tracked heavy equipment with a diesel engine that communicates its intentions clearly and completely through sound and through the visual fact of its existence. When a D6 is running 40 feet from your car, you know it is running 40 feet from your car. I made my coffee. I sat at my kitchen table where I could see the yard through the window. I drank my coffee slowly. I am a man who believes in drinking coffee slowly. Vivienne arrived 22 minutes after I started the bulldozer. She came up the gravel drive in a second car, a Range Rover, which meant she had come specifically to retrieve the Bentley or to do something about the situation. And she had done it quickly enough that someone had either called her or she had seen something that told her she needed to move. She got out of the Range Rover in a coat and boots and stood looking at the scene, her Bentley blocking my barn, my D6 idling 40 feet away with the blade down, me walking out of my house with my coffee mug. I will tell you that she looked, in that moment, exactly like a person who has arrived at a situation expecting to have leverage and discovered that the geometry was different than they had planned for. James, she said, what are you doing? Good morning, Vivienne, I said. I've got drainage work today on the back pasture, just getting the equipment warmed up. She looked at the bulldozer, she looked at her Bentley, she looked at me. I need to get my car, she said. It's your car, I said. It's been parked on my property without my permission since at least 11 p.m. last night, based on the engine temperature when I found it this morning. Deputy Dale has the documentation. She started toward her car, then she stopped, because here is the thing about parking a car 18 inches from a barn door and then coming back to move it. You need room to back up. The Bentley was nosing to the barn. To back it out, you need clearance behind you, and what was behind the Bentley, 40 feet back, was my Caterpillar D6, blade down, engine running. She turned around and looked at the bulldozer again. You need to move that, she said. I need to get to my drainage work, I said. The Bentley is blocking my barn access. If you can move the Bentley, I can get to my work. I can't back out with that thing sitting there. The thing is my equipment on my property, I said. Your car is on my property without my permission. If you'd like to think through a solution, I'm happy to wait. She stared at me. I drank my coffee. Now here is what I need you to understand about the geography and the truth of this situation. The D6 was 40 feet behind the Bentley. A Bentley Continental is about 17 feet long. To back it out of that position, Vivienne needed maybe 25 feet of clearance. She had 40 feet, which was sufficient. The D6 was not actually preventing her from backing out. It was just making it feel very present and consequential to do so, because backing a car out 40 feet in front of a running bulldozer that you have no control over is an experience that concentrates the mind considerably. This was not an accident. I had parked it exactly where I parked it. She did not know that the clearance was sufficient. She was not thinking geometrically. She was thinking about what it would feel like to back her Bentley toward a running bulldozer, and that feeling was significant enough to freeze her. James, she said, very controlled, I am asking you to move your equipment. Vivienne, I said, equally controlled, I am asking you to explain why your car was parked on my property overnight, blocking my barn. She looked at me for a moment, and I could see her deciding something. She had arrived, I think, with some plan, some version of a confrontation in which she had leverage, and I did not, in which the fact that her car was blocking my barn was a demonstration of some kind of power or pressure related to the legal dispute. What she had found instead was that she had trespassed on private property, blocked a working agricultural operation, and the documentation of that was now in the hands of the county sheriff. She decided to try a different approach. I want to discuss the legal situation, she said. I think we can resolve this without the litigation. I'd be happy to have that conversation through our attorneys, I said. Bobby Tartam's number is on file. I'm not talking about attorneys, she said. I'm talking about neighbors working something out. I looked at her, a woman who had spent 14 months sending formal violation notices, filing legal actions, and now parking her car across my barn door, wanted to talk about neighbors working something out. I thought about that for a moment. Here is what I'd like to work out, I said. I'd like your car off my property. I'd like a written acknowledgement from you that parking it here was wrong, and I'd like your legal filing dropped. Then we can talk about neighbors. She said that the legal filing was a separate matter, and she was not prepared to discuss it in the current context. I said that was fine, and that Bobby Tartam's number remained available. I finished my coffee. The bulldozer idled. It took 11 more minutes. She made 2 phone calls. I could see her talking. I could not hear the content. And then she came back and said she was willing to discuss withdrawing the legal filing in exchange for certain agreements about my property operations. I said any such agreement would need to go through Bobby and that I was not making verbal commitments in a driveway at 7:45 in the morning. She said she understood. She asked if I would move the bulldozer so she could get her car. I moved the bulldozer. I drove it around the barn to the equipment area and parked it. When I came back around the barn, Vivienne was in the Bentley, backing it down my gravel lane with careful concentration, watching her mirrors. She pulled onto the county road and was gone. I called Bobby. I told him everything. He was quiet for a moment and then said, in the tone of a man choosing his words carefully because he was genuinely pleased but wanted to remain professional, well, that changes the dynamic somewhat. What changed the dynamic was not the bulldozer. The bulldozer was a piece of equipment doing its job. What changed the dynamic was that Vivienne had come to my property at night and blocked my barn, which was criminal trespass on private property in Kentucky, and she had done it as a pressure tactic in an active legal dispute, which was exactly the kind of thing that makes a legal filing look very different to a judge than it did before. Bobby said he would be contacting her attorney that afternoon. Her attorney called Bobby the following morning. The conversation, Bobby told me, had the quality of a conversation in which one side has recently learned something that affects their risk calculation and is trying to figure out how to adjust without making it too obvious that they are adjusting. Her attorney floated some settlement concepts. Bobby listened and said he would discuss with his client. Bobby called me that afternoon and walked me through the options. The short version was this. Vivienne could drop the legal filing entirely in exchange for me not pursuing the criminal trespass charge. No admissions, no agreements about the property operations, just a mutual withdrawal and a return to the situation that had existed before she filed, which was me operating my property as I had for 11 years while the covenants sat dormant. I thought about it for 2 days. I talked to my wife, Carol, who had been watching all of this with the patient certainty of a woman who had married a man with 43 acres and understood that land like that comes with land, like that kind of situations. Carol said, with her characteristic economy of words, "Take it, you got what matters." What I had was my property back and my operations intact. The Covenant Compliance Committee, without the legal action behind it, was back to being two neighbors with a folder and no enforcement power. The barn stood. The round pen stood. The equipment area stood. Everything I had built and used for 15 years stood exactly where it had always stood. I took the deal. Bobby handled the documentation. The legal filing was withdrawn 14 days later. The Compliance Committee, without any formal legal structure, has sent no notices since. Vivienne is still in her house 5 acres over. We do not interact. Occasionally, I see her car on the county road. She does not come up my gravel lane anymore. Howard Pell, her committee partner, came over about 3 months after the settlement and had a long and somewhat awkward conversation with me about the drainage issue that had originally put us at odds, and we worked it out between the two of us in about 40 minutes in the way that neighbors with a practical problem and no lawyers present can usually work things out. He has not been part of any committee activity since. Bobby told me afterward that the case had been a useful reminder of something he had seen many times in 30 years of rural property law. People from other places sometimes arrived in rural Kentucky with the assumption that the tools they were accustomed to, formal governance, legal structures, committees and filings, gave them the same leverage in a landscape of 43-acre working properties that they might have had in a managed subdivision with a functioning HOA. They forgot that in a working landscape, the person with the land and the equipment and the 11 years of established operations has a different kind of standing than the person who arrived recently with a folder. I did not bulldoze the Bentley. I want to be clear about that because I know the title of this story suggests otherwise, and if you came here expecting me to tell you that I drove a D6 through a luxury car, you deserve an honest account. I parked the bulldozer 40 feet away and let it idle and let Vivienne's imagination do the work. That was enough. It was more than enough. Sometimes the most powerful thing a machine can do is exist and run and be present in a space where someone needs to understand that you are not, in fact, powerless. The barn is fine. The horses are fine. The round pen is fine. The equipment area is fine. Everything is exactly where it belongs on 43 acres of land that I own and maintain and work and love. And the only Bentley on my property is the gravel in my lane, which is a different kind of Bentley entirely and much more useful to me. Carol said at dinner the night after it all settled, passing the bread without looking up, that bulldozer idea was something. It worked, I said. I know it worked, she said. I'm saying it was something. I smiled into my plate. It was something. It genuinely was. The D6 is back in the equipment area where it belongs, fueled and ready, the way good equipment should be kept. If you are ever in Harlan County and you see a man on a gravel road with 43 acres and a caterpillar and a barn he built with his own hands, wave at him. He is probably doing just fine. Thumbnail text. She blocked MY barn. The bulldozer changed her mind. Bentley on MY land. D6 ended IT in 22 minutes. She picked the wrong property to mess with.